The first time Harriet hurt herself, she was carrying a bag of oranges and a rolled-up floor plan through a doorway that smelled faintly of wet stone and coffee. Barbican Center always did that to her, swallowed sound, then handed it back in odd shapes. She'd come to London after uni because she liked buildings that didn't pretend to be friendly. The Barbican didn't charm you, it dared you to stay. She cut left into a concrete corridor, past a row of battered posters and a stairwell that spiraled like a gray rib cage. The corridor bent and the light changed from warm to clinical. Somewhere above, a ventilation fan kept a steady, annoyed hum. Harriet's phone vibrated. Her agent probably. She didn't look. Then it happened. Hattie! Her name clear as a hand on her shoulder. She froze so hard the oranges shifted in the bag. Hattie! The voice called again. Closer. Her own voice. The one she heard in voicemails and editing timelines. The one she didn't really recognize until it was detached from her throat. She turned slowly, oranges pressed to her hip like a shield. The corridor behind her was empty. No footsteps, no laughter, no tourists hunting for the toilets. Just the long stretch of concrete and the harsh strip lighting. The air tasted metallic, like a coin on your tongue. Hattie, wait! Her own voice again, this time with urgency. The same clipped panic she'd used years ago when leaving a message for her mom at 2 in the morning. I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine.
Harriet's heartbeat crowded her ears. Hello? She said, and her voice came out smaller than she wanted. Who's there? Nothing. A pause so complete she could hear the oranges settle and the bag handle creak. Then, softly, as if from around the bend, Harriet Knox, please don't go. Her full name. Harriet backed up a step, heel scraping concrete. She stared into the corridor's shallow curve, where the wall turned and disappeared. The voice seemed to come from that corner, like an echo that had learned to speak first. She told herself there was a simple explanation, a prank, a recording, a coincidence. Barbican was full of performances, of sound tests, of student projects that loved messing with space. But the voice didn't sound like a speaker in a room. It sounded like it had been poured into the corridor itself, like the building had taken her voice from somewhere and decided to return it at the worst possible moment. Hattie, the voice said again, almost a whisper now. They're watching. Harriet's throat tightened. She ran, not fast at first, just a hurried walk that became a jog, bag swinging, oranges thumping inside. She didn't look back until she hit the next junction, where the corridor split into 2 identical veins of concrete. She looked, and she saw nothing. No one. Only the Barbican, still and brutal, holding its breath like it knew a secret. Harriet pressed a trembling hand to her mouth and tasted orange peel on her fingers. She told herself she'd imagined it. She told herself the building couldn't speak. But as she turned toward the lifts, her phone lit up again.
unknown number, no caller ID. And the voicemail icon appeared without her answering. A new message from her.
Back in her flat, Harriet played the voicemail 3 times before she could breathe normally. The first time, she stared at the screen as if it might catch fire. The second time, she paced between the kitchen counter and the window that faced the street. The third time, she sat on the floor with her back against the cabinet and listened like she was waiting for a verdict. "Hattie," her voice said, low and urgent. "If you're hearing this, do not go back. Do not go back alone. They've built it. They've—" a crackle, like fingers brushing a microphone. "They've made the building answer." Then silence. The number was blocked. The timestamp was 20 minutes earlier, before she'd even reached the Barbican doors. Harriet tried to laugh, but her laugh sounded wrong in her own kitchen. She tried to call the number back. No connection. She opened her laptop and searched her sent messages, her cloud drive, her recordings folder. Nothing. No file exported recently. No missed calls from herself. No sign of a prank. Except she knew her voice. She knew the way she swallowed certain consonants, the way her T softened at the end of words. The message wasn't someone imitating her badly. It was her, down to the tiny habits she couldn't hear until they were mirrored. Harriet lived with sound the way other people lived with light. She worked as an audio editor for podcasts and short documentaries, and lately she'd been pulling voiceover gigs to pay for her part-time master's in acoustic design.
She'd learned to spot compression artifacts, to hear a room in a breath, to tell the difference between a cheap speaker and a good one by the way it failed at the edges. This voicemail wasn't cheap. It sounded present, as if she'd spoken into the phone herself. She scrubbed the audio into software and stared at the waveform. It looked normal, too normal. No obvious splices, no distortion. The background noise was faint, an airy hush, a distant fan. Not her flat, not a studio, not even a tube platform. Concrete, maybe. A ventilation system. A big space with hard walls. Barbican. Her stomach tightened. She remembered the corridor, the way her name had seemed to float without a source. She remembered how the light changed, how she'd felt watched without seeing anyone. Harriet closed her laptop and pressed her palms to her eyes until she saw sparks. Then she did what she always did when panic started building walls around her chest. She called someone who wouldn't let her spiral. Nina answered on the second ring. "Hattie, you alive?" Harriet tried to keep her voice casual, failed immediately. "Can you come over?" A pause. Nina's tone shifted. "What happened?" Harriet swallowed. "I heard myself. At the Barbican. Like a recording, but not. And I got a voicemail. From me." Nina didn't laugh. Nina never laughed at the wrong time. She just said, "Okay, I'm coming. Don't go anywhere."
Harriet stood, moved to the window, and watched London do what it always did. Buses moving, people moving, the city pretending it wasn't full of corners that could swallow you. She told herself it was a scam, a deep fake, a stalker with a good sample. But who would need her voice? Who would go to the trouble of making the Barbican answer? Her phone vibrated again, another voicemail, from the same blocked number. Harriet's finger hovered over play, and her own voice whispered, closer than the speaker should allow, "They're going to make you be there." Nina arrived with rain in her hair and a small can of pepper spray she placed on Harriet's table like a ridiculous offering. "You're not listening to any more of those," Nina said, taking Harriet's phone. Harriet didn't argue. She watched Nina play the voicemail anyway, because Nina couldn't help herself. When Harriet's voice finished whispering, Nina's expression didn't go pale the way Harriet expected. Instead, it hardened. "That's your voice," Nina said. "I know." Nina set the phone down carefully. "Do you have any enemies? Exes? People you've edited who got weird?" Harriet almost laughed. "It's podcasting. Everyone's weird." Nina was a theater stage manager, someone who lived around strange people, but didn't flinch at them. She leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Tell me exactly what happened at the Barbican." Harriet told her about the corridor, about hearing her name, about the feeling that the voice was coming from the concrete itself. She described it like describing weather, pressure, temperature, an invisible shift in air. Nina listened, eyes narrowed, as if the story was a script she was already blocking in her head. When Harriet finished, Nina said, "This is either someone messing with you or someone trying to scare you into doing something." "Doing what?" Nina stared at her. "Going back." Harriet's stomach did a slow drop. "Why would I go back?" Nina raised an eyebrow. "Because they used your voice like a hook. You heard yourself. It's personal. It's creepy." "It's the kind of thing you can't let go." Harriet hated how right she was. Nina continued, "Also, you work with audio. If someone wanted to lure the one person who can tell what's fake, they'd use the one thing you can't ignore." Harriet rubbed her arms. Gooseflesh rose despite the warm kitchen. "I don't understand the point," Harriet said. "Even if they can clone my voice, why Barbican? Why the corridor?" Nina's gaze flicked to Harriet's laptop. "What were you doing there today?" Harriet hesitated. "I had a meeting, a consultant job, sound survey." Nina's eyes sharpened. "For who?" Harriet reached for the folder in her bag and pulled out the contract sheet. Her fingers shook slightly. "Barbican Estates," she read. "Private residential section. A complaint about noise transfer. Someone hears footsteps in their corridor at night." Nina stared. "So you were hired because someone hears something in a corridor?" Harriet's laugh came out thin. "And then I heard something in a corridor." "Convenient," Nina said, flat. Harriet felt a slow, cold realization rise like damp through carpet. "You think it's connected." "I think," Nina said, "someone wants you involved." Harriet opened the contract details. The contact name, Martin Vale, facilities liaison. She searched the email thread. The initial request had come 2 weeks ago, polite, professional, a little urgent. The meeting time today was noted as moved per access issues. Harriet had blamed it on Barbican's labyrinthine bureaucracy.
Nina leaned in and pointed at the last line of the email. "Please use the staff corridor entrance. I'll meet you there." Harriet swallowed. "I went through the public entrance," she said quietly. Nina's finger tapped the screen. "And you ended up in a corridor anyway." Harriet stared at the line until it blurred. She remembered the voice saying, "They're watching." She remembered the last voicemail whispering, "They're going to make you be there." "Okay," Nina said. "We do this like adults. We don't go alone. We bring someone official." "You mean police?" Nina grimaced. "Try calling the Met and telling them a concrete building is calling your name in your own voice. See how that goes." Harriet hated that she was right again. Nina sat back. "We need a smarter way. Who would take this seriously?" Harriet thought of the only person she knew who cared about sound the way she did. Someone who didn't see audio as a vibe, but as a weapon. "Dr. Sacha Ingram," Harriet said. Nina frowned. "Your lecturer?" "My supervisor," Harriet corrected. "Acoustic security, sound masking, counter-surveillance." Nina whistled softly. Of course that exists. Harriet already had her email open, fingers hovering over the keyboard. She typed fast, leaving out the parts that sounded insane, focusing on the facts that would make Sacha pay attention. Her voice used without consent, location-specific sound, corridor acoustics, possible engineered playback. Before she hit send, Harriet felt her phone buzz in Nina's hand again. Nina looked at it. Her face tightened. Another voicemail. Harriet's mouth went dry. Don't play it. Nina didn't. She just read the preview line on the lock screen. And then she turned the phone toward Harriet. The preview text wasn't a transcript. It was a sentence, a direction. Come to level 2, Brutalist Corridor, now. And beneath it, in smaller text, like a signature, Hattie.
They went anyway, not because they believed the message, because Harriet couldn't stand the thought of someone using her name like a leash and expecting her to obey. They took a cab to the Barbican, Nina sitting close, her knee touching Harriet's as if to remind her she wasn't alone. The city slid past in rain-smeared rectangles. Harriet watched the reflections in shop windows and kept seeing her own face overlaid, like a double exposure of herself and someone else wearing her skin. At the Barbican, Nina insisted they start in public spaces, bright foyers, people with umbrellas, a cafe line, human noise, the comfort of witnesses. Harriet checked her email on the move. No reply from Dr. Ingram yet. They found an information desk. Harriet tried to sound normal as she asked for Martin Vale. The staff member blinked, typed, frowned. Facilities liaison? The woman repeated. We don't have anyone by that name. Harriet's stomach dropped. The woman added quickly, maybe he's in residential? That's managed separately. Is there a level 2 corridor? Harriet began. Nina cut in smoothly. We're here for an acoustic survey appointment. Could you tell us the correct contact? The staff member hesitated, then scribbled a number. Try estate security. They'll direct you. Harriet took the paper with hands that didn't quite feel like hers. They called. A bored voice answered, asked for details, promised to look into it, then suggested Harriet send an email and wait.
Nina hung up and exhaled sharply. So your contact doesn't exist. Harriet looked around the foyer. A violinist somewhere was tuning, the note like a needle. She felt irrationally that the building was listening. She said, "Let's leave." Nina nodded immediately, relieved. And then Harriet's phone buzzed again. Not a voicemail. A call. Unknown. Harriet stared at it, pulse in her throat. Nina didn't wait for permission. She answered and put it on speaker. For a moment there was nothing, only a faint, airy hiss. Then Harriet's own voice filled the space between them, calm as a lullaby. "Thank you for coming back." Harriet's blood turned to ice. Nina leaned close to the phone. "Who is this?" Harriet's voice replied, "You brought a friend. That's fine. Friends make better witnesses." Harriet's knees went weak. Nina grabbed her elbow. "Stop," Nina said sharply. "What do you want?" A soft laugh, Harriet's laugh, wrong in someone else's mouth. "Presence," the voice said. "Confirmation, a human ear, a human story." Harriet found her voice. "You're using recordings." "No," her voice corrected gently. "We're using space." Harriet's gaze flicked to the concrete columns, the high ceilings, the corridors that branched like arteries. "Where are you?" Nina demanded. The voice didn't answer that. It said, "Level 2. The corridor that bends, the one you ran from. Harriet shook her head hard. No. Her voice on the phone turned almost tender. If you don't come, Harriet, you'll still be there. A pause.
And you won't like what you're there for. The line clicked dead. Nina stared at the phone as if it had bitten her. Okay, she breathed. Okay, we're not doing this. Harriet's mind was racing too fast to keep up. Did you hear what it said? Yeah, threats. Weird audio? We go. No, Harriet said. It said I'll still be there. Like they're making evidence. Nina's face tightened. Like framing you. Harriet felt the floor shift under her. Her voice used as a hook was one thing. Her presence used as a weapon was another. She looked at the Barbican's concrete, at the corridors that disappeared into shadow. She remembered Dr. Ingram once saying, "Sound isn't just heard. Sound is believed." Harriet's throat went tight. If they're building a story, she whispered, they need witnesses. Nina's eyes narrowed. Then we stay in public. We find security. We don't go into any corridor alone. Harriet nodded, but she knew, deep down, that the corridor wasn't the real trap. The trap was London itself. Its assumptions, its CCTV, its timelines, its confidence that what you hear is what happened. And somewhere in the Barbican's concrete veins, someone was rewriting reality with a voice that sounded exactly like hers.
They found a security guard who looked like he'd seen enough oddness to file it under Tuesday. His badge said O'Donnell. His eyes said he didn't like being pulled into other people's dramas. Nina did the talking. She framed it as harassment, impersonation, threats. She played the earlier voicemail. O'Donnell listened without expression, but Harriet noticed the small tightening at the corner of his mouth when her voice said, "They've made the building answer." "That's unsettling," he admitted. "Can you escort us to level 2?" Nina asked, "just to confirm there's no one messing around." O'Donnell exhaled like someone agreeing to carry a heavy box. "Fine, but you stay with me." They followed him through staff doors into spaces the public didn't see. Corridors narrower, lighting harsher, the smell of cleaning chemicals and old dust. Harriet's heart climbed into her throat with every step. At the lift, O'Donnell pressed a keycard. The doors closed, humming. Inside the lift, Harriet felt the familiar, stupid urge to confess everything. Her fear, her confusion, her anger at the sheer intimacy of being haunted by herself. Instead, she said, "This is going to sound mad." O'Donnell grunted. "In this building, mad's the default setting." The lift opened onto level 2. The air was cooler here, and the silence had weight. O'Donnell led them down a corridor where the concrete walls looked too close.
The strip lights above flickered slightly, not enough to be dramatic, just enough to make you doubt your eyes. Harriet recognized the bend ahead. Her skin prickled. "This is where it happened," she whispered. O'Donnell glanced at her. "What happened?" "I heard my voice," she said. "From there." O'Donnell slowed. "Anyone around?" They all listened. At first, nothing. Then, faintly, like the corridor exhaling. "Hattie." Harriet's stomach turned. O'Donnell's head snapped up. Nina grabbed Harriet's sleeve. "Hattie," the voice said again, coming from the bend, the sound skating along the concrete like water. O'Donnell lifted his radio. Control, I've got an audio disturbance on level 2. Possible speaker, I'm investigating. The radio crackled with static. No reply. O'Donnell frowned, tapped it, tried again. Only static answered. Nina whispered, "That's convenient." Harriet's own voice, ahead, softened. "Thank you for bringing security." O'Donnell's jaw clenched. He drew his torch and stepped forward, shoulders squared. Nina tried to follow. He held out an arm. "Stay back," he ordered. He rounded the bend. Harriet and Nina waited, ears straining, hearing only distant ventilation. Harriet's heart hammered against her ribs like it wanted out. Then O'Donnell's voice echoed back, not from a radio, but from the corridor itself. "Clear. Nothing here." Harriet blinked. "That's not..." O'Donnell's voice again, identical. "Go on. You can come." Nina's eyes widened. "That's not him."
That's the corridor doing it. Harriet felt dizzy. The sound was perfect. Tone, distance, everything. Like the building had learned how to mimic. She stepped forward without meaning to. Nina yanked her back. "No." From the bend, Harriet's voice drifted out. Patient, coaxing. "Harriet, it's safe. Come see." Harriet's throat burned. "Stop." The voice chuckled softly. Her chuckle, the one she hated hearing in recordings. "It's just sound," it said. "Sound doesn't hurt." O'Donnell didn't come back. Harriet realized with a cold clarity that they hadn't heard his footsteps since he rounded the bend. Only his voice. Only the corridor's performance. Nina whispered, "We're leaving." Now. They turned. And behind them, from the corridor they'd come through, O'Donnell's voice rose again. "Don't run." But it wasn't coming from the bend anymore. It was coming from behind them. From the wall. From the concrete itself. Like a mouth had opened where there shouldn't be one. Harriet's skin crawled. Nina grabbed her hand and ran.
They burst back into the lift lobby, breathless, and hammered the button. The lift took too long, the seconds stretching like chewing gum. Harriet heard the corridor behind them whisper her name again, softer now, as if pleased. The lift doors opened. Nina shoved Harriet inside. O'Donnell's radio lay on the floor near the lift threshold, abandoned, the static still hissing faintly from its speaker. Nina snatched it up on impulse, as if taking it might take back some control. The door slid shut. Harriet's hands were shaking so badly she couldn't type. Nina tried to get signal on her phone. It flickered between bars and nothing, like the building was deciding whether to allow it. When the lift opened at ground level, they stumbled out into the foyer's bright hum like people emerging from underwater. Harriet's lungs filled properly for the first time in 10 minutes. Nina pulled her into a corner near a display case and stared at her hard. "We are not going back in." Harriet nodded, but her mind was snagged on one thing. O'Donnell. "He didn't come back," Harriet whispered. Nina's jaw tightened. "We tell someone. A real someone." They found another security desk. Nina demanded a supervisor. Harriet tried to speak, but her voice kept collapsing. When the supervisor arrived, a woman with tired eyes and an expression that suggested she'd already decided they were trouble, Nina explained again, faster, sharper, angrier. Harriet played the voicemails. Nina described losing O'Donnell in the corridor. The supervisor listened with a face that didn't move. Then she asked, "Which guard?" "O'Donnell," Nina said. The supervisor blinked. "We have no O'Donnell on shift." Nina went very still. "He escorted us. He had a badge." The supervisor checked a tablet, scrolled, frowned. "No O'Donnell today." Harriet's stomach rolled. Nina leaned forward. "Then who the hell was he?" The supervisor's eyes narrowed. "If you're accusing someone of impersonating security..." Harriet interrupted, voice raw. "Please, someone is missing. We went into a corridor, and he didn't come out." The supervisor hesitated, annoyance cracking slightly into concern. She motioned to another guard. "Get estates, and check CCTV." Relief hit Harriet so hard she almost cried. They waited in a small office that smelled of printer toner. Harriet stared at a framed photo of the Barbican skyline and tried to convince herself this was now normal, official, solvable. The supervisor returned with a different guard and a troubled look. "We checked CCTV," she said. Harriet sat forward. "And?" The supervisor slid a tablet across the desk. On screen, a camera view showed the level 2 lift lobby. Harriet saw herself and Nina waiting by the lift. She saw the corridor mouth behind them. But there was no O'Donnell, no man with a torch, no badge. Harriet watched herself speaking to empty air, gesturing, reacting, backing away from something unseen. Nina's face went pale beside her.
"That's impossible." The supervisor's voice was careful now. "From the cameras, it appears you were alone." Harriet's mouth went dry. "No, he was there. Nina grabbed the tablet and scrubbed back. Same result. Harriet and Nina, no one else. Nina whispered, "We heard him." Harriet's mind spun. She remembered his grunt in the lift, his cynical joke, the heaviness of his presence. Or had that heaviness been sound, too? Harriet suddenly understood the scale of the trick. This wasn't just her voice being used. It was the idea of a person being built out of sound. A presence engineered so convincingly that 2 sane women would swear a man stood beside them, and CCTV would swear he didn't. The supervisor cleared her throat. "If you feel unwell, we can call an ambulance." Nina's eyes flashed. "We're not unwell." Harriet swallowed hard. "What about his radio?" Nina slowly held up the device she'd grabbed in the lift. The supervisor stared at it. Her face shifted. "That's ours," she said quietly. "That belongs to this building." Harriet felt ice spread through her veins. If O'Donnell hadn't existed, then his radio was just another prop placed where a real person should have been. Or worse, a breadcrumb, a gift from whoever was running the echo, daring them to follow. Nina leaned in, voice low. "They want to make us look crazy." Harriet stared at the radio. The static had stopped. A new sound came through, soft as breath. Harriet's own voice, murmuring like a secret shared into someone's ear. "You see, the building remembers what the cameras forget."
Dr. Sacha Ingram replied at midnight. Harriet lay on her sofa with the lights on, unable to sleep. Nina dozing in a chair like a guard dog with mascara. Harriet's phone vibrated, and she shut up instantly. The email was short, clinical, and somehow more terrifying than anything else. "Harriet, do not engage further alone. What you're describing is consistent with a staged acoustic presence, directional speakers, delay mapping, psychoacoustic masking. I can come tomorrow morning. Do not return to the location tonight. Save all audio. Call me." A number followed. Harriet called immediately. Sacha answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting. "Harriet." Her voice was calm, precise, the kind of calm that didn't come from comfort, but from competence. Harriet explained again, voice cracking. Nina sat up, listening. When Harriet finished, Sacha was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Someone has access to your voice." "I don't know how." Sacha's tone sharpened. "You do podcast work. You have raw recordings. You have cloud storage. You have clients." Harriet swallowed. "Yes." Sacha continued. "And they're using the Barbican because it's acoustically complex. Concrete corridors, hard surfaces, bends that create naturally convincing reflections. Perfect for hiding speakers, for making a sound appear to come from a place it doesn't." Nina leaned toward the phone. "So it's speakers. That's it." "It's speakers," Sacha agreed, "and choreography, and psychology."
Harriet whispered, "What about the guard? The CCTV showed we were alone." Sacha's voice cooled. "You may have been hearing a constructed presence, a layered sound profile, footstep samples, clothing rustle, proximity cues. The human brain will invent a body if the audio fits." Nina swore under her breath. Harriet felt nauseous. So we hallucinated a man. You perceived a man, Sacha corrected. The distinction matters. Harriet's fingers tightened around the phone. Why? Why do this? Sacha paused. Because sound is the easiest way to fabricate a timeline, she said. You can plant a witness memory with it. You can create presence without a body. You can build a story that contradicts the cameras. Harriet's mouth went dry. Framing. Or alibi, Sacha said. Harriet stared into the dark kitchen. An alibi made of echoes. Sacha continued. Barbican has private residential wings, restricted spaces. If someone wants a crime to look like someone else was there, sound is a tool. Nina asked, so what do we do? Sacha's voice turned decisive. Tomorrow, in daylight, we go together. We bring a portable recorder, a spectrum analyzer if I can get one, and a rational plan. We locate the source. We do not chase voices. We do not follow instructions. If we find evidence of harassment or tampering, we involve police with proof, not stories. Harriet's throat tightened with relief so sharp it hurt. Sacha added, Harriet, did you sign anything? Harriet blinked.
A standard consultant agreement. Does it include access permissions? Staff corridors? Harriet grabbed the folder, flipped pages. It says, yes, access to residential corridors as required. Sacha's voice hardened. Then someone created a paper trail inviting you into a restricted area. That's not random. That's intent. Harriet whispered. So they wanted me there. Yes, Sacha said, and they wanted you to be believable. After the call, Nina sat beside Harriet on the sofa and stared at the blank TV screen as if it might show answers. You're not going to sleep, are you? Nina asked. Harriet shook her head. Nina reached over and squeezed her hand. Tomorrow, we go with the scary professor. Harriet managed a thin smile. Outside, London's sirens wailed distantly, like ghosts that never learned to stop being alive. Harriet tried not to flinch at every sound. She failed. At 2:13 a.m., her phone buzzed again with a new voicemail notification. Nina reached for it. Harriet caught her wrist. Don't. Nina froze. They stared at the phone together, breathing shallowly, like two people watching a snake under glass. The screen lit up with the preview text. Not a threat this time. A promise. Tomorrow, you'll hear the truth.
Morning made the Barbican look less haunted and more like what it was, a masterpiece of stubborn concrete, softened only by rain-darkened surfaces and pockets of greenery that clung like hope. Sacha arrived with a backpack full of equipment and a face that didn't show fear, only focus. She was in her 40s, hair clipped back, eyes sharp as if she could see waveforms floating in the air. She greeted Harriet with a nod. You saved the voicemails. Harriet handed over a USB stick with files exported in 3 formats because anxiety made her thorough. Sacha's eyes flicked to Nina. You're the witness. Nina raised a hand. Hi, I'd like to stop being in a horror story. Sacha's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Then we do this correctly. They met with Barbican security again, this time with Sacha speaking. She didn't mention ghosts. She mentioned possible unauthorized speaker installation, harassment, safety risks, and liability. Liability made people listen. A manager agreed to accompany them to level 2 with 2 guards, real ones, whose names matched the roster. Cameras were checked, radios worked. Harriet felt slightly steadier, surrounded by reality. But when the lift opened onto level 2, the air still felt wrong, cooler, heavier, as if the corridor itself remembered last night and was pleased they'd returned. Sacha stepped out first, holding a small recorder in one hand and a device with a tiny screen in the other.
She moved slowly, head tilted, listening the way some people listen to music. They approached the bend. Nothing happened at first. No voice, no whisper. Harriet's heart pounded anyway. Sacha paused, then said softly, "Speak." Harriet blinked. "What?" "Say your name," Sacha instructed. "Normal volume." Harriet swallowed. "Harriet Knox." The sound bounced down the corridor and came back thinly, a regular echo, nothing supernatural. Sacha watched her device. "Good. Now, say it again." Harriet repeated it. Sacha's eyes narrowed. "There." Harriet frowned. "What?" Sacha pointed at the screen. "There's an anomaly. A delayed response not consistent with the corridor's geometry. A second reflection." Nina's voice went tight. "Meaning?" "Meaning," Sacha said. "Something is answering her." As if summoned, Harriet's own voice drifted from the bend, gentle, coaxing. "Hattie." Harriet flinched. Sacha didn't. She lifted her recorder and watched the levels spike. Harriet's voice continued. "You brought help. Good." One of the guards muttered, "What the hell?" Sacha spoke calmly into the corridor. "Who's controlling the playback?" A pause. Then Harriet's voice laughed softly. "Playback," it said, amused. "Such a small word for what we are doing." Sacha's eyes scanned the walls. Harriet's voice continued, slower now, savoring each syllable. "You hear what you believe. You follow what calls your name." Sacha stepped forward, examining a vent panel near the bend. Her fingers traced the seam.
"Here," she murmured. One guard stepped in, pried the panel open. Inside was darkness, wiring, and, tucked neatly behind the metal, an oblong black device no bigger than a paperback. A speaker. Sacha exhaled once. "Found it." Harriet's knees threatened to fold. Nina grabbed her elbow. Harriet's voice from the corridor sounded almost disappointed. "Oh, Harriet." Sacha reached inside and unplugged the device. The corridor fell silent. No whisper. No coaxing. Just the raw hum of ventilation and the distant murmur of the building's living heart. Harriet's relief was immediate, dizzying. Then Sacha said quietly, "That's only one." Harriet's stomach dropped. Sacha tapped the device screen again. The response signature suggests at least 3 sources. This was the closest. One of the guards looked pale. Someone planted speakers in a restricted corridor. Sacha nodded and placed them with intention. Harriet whispered, "To fake presence." Sacha met her eyes. "To manufacture reality." The manager, visibly sweating now, said, "We'll sweep the area." Sacha shook her head slightly. "Not like that. If you stomp around, you'll destroy what we need to prove. Placement, wiring routes, access points." Harriet stared at the little speaker, like it was a parasite pulled from a wound. Nina whispered, "So it's real." Harriet's throat tightened. "It's real." Sacha slid the device into an evidence bag she'd brought herself. "Now we ask the right question," she said.
Harriet's voice, no longer echoing, now lived only in their memories. Sacha continued, "Who benefits from you being heard here?" Harriet swallowed, mind racing toward the only terrifying answer. Someone wanted her voice in this corridor the way fingerprints were wanted on a weapon. And if they'd built an echo to fake presence, what else had they built to fake?
The Barbican's internal investigation moved like thick syrup,
Meetings, forms, polite apologies. Harriet could feel the institution trying to absorb the weirdness and file it away. Sacha refused to let it. She brought Harriet and Nina to a small cafe outside the Barbican and laid everything out like a surgeon laying out tools. The speaker, Sacha said, was not random consumer tech. It's directional, designed to project sound into a narrow beam. It can make a voice appear to come from a precise location. Nina sipped her coffee like it was armor. So someone could stand anywhere, play Harriet's voice, and make it seem like she's right there. Yes, Sacha said. And with multiple speakers, you can simulate movement. A person walking, turning, coming closer. Harriet's stomach churned. Like the guard. Sacha nodded. Like your phantom escort. Nina's voice went tight. And the CCTV. Sacha's gaze sharpened. Cameras record light. Human witnesses record stories. If you can make witnesses confident, you can overwrite what cameras show. Harriet stared at her reflection in the cafe window. She looked normal. That was the worst part. Sacha continued. Now we need motive. This is expensive, skilled. It's not a prank. Harriet whispered. Someone is framing me. Or using you as a cover. Sacha replied. Harriet's phone buzzed again. Harriet flinched out of habit. Nina leaned in, ready to snatch it. Sacha held up a hand. Let it. Harriet looked at the screen. A new email.
From the address that had hired her, martin.vale@barbican.estates.co.uk. The subject line, "You are late." Harriet's throat went dry. She opened it. Harriet, we needed you on level 2 at 2210 yesterday. Your absence complicated things. Please don't complicate today. MV. Harriet's hands shook. He's saying I was supposed to be there. Nina's voice rose. That's insane. Sasha's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. He's establishing narrative, she murmured. He's documenting expectation that you were there. Harriet scrolled. At the bottom was an attachment, a PDF. Harriet clicked it. A visitor log form. Her name typed in. Time in 22:02. Time out 22:23. Signature. A scribble that looked disturbingly like her own. Harriet's vision tunneled. I didn't sign that. Sasha leaned in, calm as steel. Of course you didn't. Nina's face went white. That building a paper trail. Harriet's mouth went dry. For what? Sasha stared at the log for a long moment. For an event, she said quietly. Something that happened, or will happen, around that time. Harriet's stomach dropped. Like a crime. Sasha nodded once. And your name will be attached to it. Nina slammed her coffee down. Okay, police, now. Sasha raised a hand. Yes, but not with ghost voices. With physical evidence. The speaker device. The email trail. The forged log. The analysis. Harriet's lungs felt too small. Sasha's phone rang. She answered, listened. Then her eyes flicked up. It's worse, she said softly.
Harriet's blood turned to ice. What? Sacha's gaze held Harriet's. There was an assault in the Barbican residential corridor last night, she said. A woman pushed down the stairs. Severe injuries. Harriet's heart stopped. Sacha added, time-stamped at 22:12. Harriet felt her body go cold, as if the echo had reached into her chest and turned everything off. Nina whispered, they wanted you there at 22:10. Harriet's voice cracked. They're trying to make it look like I... Sacha's tongue was sharp now. We move fast. We do not panic. We give police the evidence before someone else gives them your name. Harriet nodded.
numb. Outside, London continued as always. Buses passing, people laughing, the city pretending it wasn't full of carefully engineered lies. But Harriet knew now that someone had turned sound into a weapon, and they'd aimed it at her.
At the police station, Harriet felt like she was watching herself from across a room. She answered questions. She handed over files. She watched officers exchange glances at phrases like directional speakers and constructed presence. But Sacha anchored the conversation. She didn't dramatize. She explained calmly, offering concrete proof. The device bagged, the waveform analysis, the email trail, the forged log. A detective with tired eyes finally leaned back and said, "So you're telling me someone tried to fabricate her presence in a corridor using sound?" "Yes," Sacha said, "to contaminate witness memory and create plausible narrative." The detective rubbed his forehead. Christ! Harriet's stomach turned again. "Is the victim alive?" The detective glanced at a file. "Yes, barely. She can't speak yet." Harriet's breath caught. "Who is she?" The detective hesitated, then answered. "Resident. Name's Elodie Mercer." Harriet didn't recognize it. That almost made it worse. Random victims were harder to understand. Nina was pacing like a caged animal. So what now? The detective's gaze fixed on Harriet. "Now, Miss Knox, you do not return to the Barbican. You do not answer unknown calls. You do not go chasing evidence on your own." Harriet nodded, throat tight. "And," the detective added, "we need to know if anyone else has access to your voice files." Harriet felt shame rise hot. "My clients, my agent, cloud storage." "Anyone specific?" the detective pressed. Harriet hesitated.
A name surfaced. Someone she'd dismissed as annoying, harmless. A freelance sound designer she'd worked with on a documentary about urban legends. A man who loved the Barbican's architecture, who'd once told her the corridors were a perfect instrument. Crispin Holt. Harriet swallowed. "There's someone," she said quietly. The detective leaned in. "Tell me." Harriet described Crispin. Charming in a brittle way, obsessed with sonic space, always asking for raw files, just in case, always talking about how sound could control belief. Sacha's eyes narrowed. "He's trained," she murmured. Nina snapped. "Do you think he did it?" Sacha didn't answer immediately. She looked at Harriet. "Did he know you were hired at the Barbican?" Harriet's stomach dropped. "I posted about it," she whispered, "on my story. Just exciting gig today." Nina swore. The detective wrote quickly, "We'll look into him." They left the station in late afternoon drizzle. London felt louder now, every footstep suspicious. At Harriet's flat, Sacha insisted on checking her laptop security, cloud access logs, recent downloads. There were anomalies, logins from devices Harriet didn't recognize. Sacha's expression tightened. "They've been in your storage." Harriet's mouth went dry. "So, they have everything?" "Yes," Sacha said, "including your old voicemails, your raw takes, your private notes." Harriet felt violated in a way she couldn't quite name. Nina sat beside her, voice soft for the first time in hours. "We'll be okay." Harriet wanted to believe it. Then her phone buzzed again. Not unknown this time. A number from Barbican Estates. Real. Harriet stared. Sacha nodded once. "Put it on speaker." Harriet answered with trembling fingers. "Hello?" Silence. Then a familiar hiss.
and Harriet's own voice, calm as if discussing grocery lists. "You brought police. That was predictable." Harriet's skin crawled. Sacha leaned in, voice cold. "Who are you?" Harriet's voice laughed softly. "Oh, Sacha, you hear everything except the point." Harriet's throat tightened. "Stop using my voice." "It's not yours," the voice replied gently. "You recorded it. You stored it. You gave it away in pieces. I merely assembled it." Nina's eyes filled with furious tears. "You psycho." Harriet's voice didn't react. It said, "Tonight, they will ask you where you were at 22:12. Harriet's heart lurched. "And you will say," her voice continued, "I was never there." A pause. "And the building," her voice whispered, "will disagree." The call ended. Harriet sat frozen. Sacha's face was stone. "They're not finished," she said quietly. Harriet's mouth went dry. "What do they mean the building will disagree?" Sacha stared out the window toward the city. "It means," she said, "they've built something bigger than a corridor."
The next day, news broke quietly. Local sites first, then larger outlets. Barbican resident injured in stairwell incident. No suspects named, no details. Harriet tried to go about her day like a person with a life. She failed. Every sound felt staged. Every neighbor's footsteps felt like an audition. Sacha returned with more equipment and a plan. "They said the building will disagree," Harriet said, voice hollow. "What does that mean?" Sacha set down her bag. "It means they've expanded the acoustic staging beyond that corridor," she said. "They may have seeded multiple zones. They may be able to generate presence that people will report. Multiple witnesses, multiple locations." Nina's voice went sharp. "So they can make it sound like Harriet is all over the building." Sacha nodded once. "And if enough people say they heard her, it becomes a kind of proof." Harriet felt sick. "But sound isn't proof." Sacha's eyes were hard. "Sound is belief. Belief is what juries run on." Nina paced. "So what do we do?" Sacha looked at Harriet. "We catch them using it." Harriet's throat tightened. "How?" Sacha didn't give her a how-to. She gave her a story plan, one designed to trap without teaching anyone to commit harm. "We set a controlled situation," Sacha said. "We coordinate with police. We return to the Barbican with permission, with officers in place, with recording devices that can pinpoint playback sources. We make them confident enough to play the echo." Nina's eyes widened. "You want to bait them." Sacha's gaze didn't flinch. "They already baited Harriet." Harriet's stomach turned. She hated the thought of going back. She hated even more the thought of letting someone use her voice as a weapon forever. Police agreed, reluctantly, skeptically, but the physical speaker device and forged log were enough to justify a controlled sweep. That evening, Harriet returned to the Barbican with Sacha and Nina and plainclothes officers positioned like shadows that pretended not to exist. The building hummed with normal life. Gallery patrons, couples, students. Harriet wanted to scream at them, "You don't know what the walls can do." Sacha fitted Harriet with a small mic clipped under her collar. "Remember," she murmured, "you do not follow any voice. You stay in sight. You let them reveal themselves." Harriet nodded, heart thundering. They walked near level 2, but didn't enter the corridor. They stayed in a wider passage with sightlines, cameras, exits. Police watched monitors. Sacha watched her analyzer.
For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Harriet's nerves twisted. Then, from somewhere deeper, a sound slipped through the air like a blade. Hattie. Her own voice. Harriet flinched despite herself. Sasha's eyes snapped to her device. The screen spiked. She whispered, "There." The voice continued, louder now, perfectly placed so it sounded like Harriet was calling from a side corridor. "Nina," Harriet's voice said, pleading, "help me." Nina's face went pale with rage.
"Oh, you absolute!" Harriet squeezed Nina's hand hard to keep her from lunging toward the sound. The voice kept going, weaving panic, urgency. Exactly the tone that would make a stranger turn their head. Exactly the tone that would make a security guard step forward. A couple nearby looked up, concerned. One man started walking toward the side corridor. An officer intercepted him gently, redirecting. Sasha whispered, "They're trying to create witnesses. People who'll say they heard you calling for help." Harriet's stomach dropped. "So later they can say I was there." Sasha nodded. "Yes." Harriet's voice shifted, suddenly calm, intimate. "Harriet, you're doing so well." Harriet's skin crawled. Sasha's fingers moved fast on her device. "Multiple sources," she murmured. "They're moving the voice without moving a body." Then something changed. A faint click, like a device switching. Sasha's eyes widened slightly. "They're adjusting." Harriet's voice, now from the concrete above them, said, "Look up." Harriet didn't. She stared forward, breathing hard. The voice chuckled softly. "Good. You learned." Sasha's jaw tightened. "They're close." Harriet's pulse hammered. And then finally, a real sound cut through the engineered performance. A footstep. Not the clean sample of a loop. A real footstep. Irregular, slightly wet. A person moving somewhere they shouldn't. One of the plainclothes officers lifted a hand to his earpiece. Sasha whispered, "Now." The police moved.
The voice stopped mid-sentence, as if someone had yanked the plug. The corridor fell back into ordinary noise. Distant conversation, ventilation, the thin hiss of London existing. Harriet's heart pounded. In the sudden quiet, Harriet realized something worse. The voice hadn't just been baiting witnesses. It had been talking to her. Like it could see exactly where she stood. Like it had eyes.
The suspect ran. Harriet didn't see him at first, only the sudden shift of bodies, officers accelerating, people stepping back in confusion. Then she caught a glimpse. A man in a dark jacket slipping through a staff door with practiced speed, head down, moving like someone who knew the building's blood vessels. Sasha grabbed Harriet's sleeve. "Stay!" Nina looked ready to sprint after the man herself. Harriet's legs felt full of sand. Police pursued, doors slammed, radio chatter crackled. Then, from somewhere above, Harriet heard her voice again, faint, almost amused. "Good chase." Harriet's stomach turned. He's still playing it. Sasha's eyes were locked on her analyzer. "Yes," she said, tense. "He has remote control, or an accomplice." Nina's voice went sharp. "Accomplice." Harriet felt cold. She remembered the emails, the forged signature, the precision. This had never felt like a one-man obsession. Police returned minutes later, breathless, empty-handed. "He disappeared into the residential wing," an officer said. "Access controlled. We need keys." Sasha's expression was tight with frustration. "He's using the building's compartments." Harriet's throat burned. What if he hurt someone else? The officer's jaw clenched. "We're locking down access points." Harriet stood in the middle of the Barbican's public flow, feeling like the only person who could hear the building's secret mouth opening and closing. Then Sasha's device beeped, urgent. Sasha's face tightened.
"There's a strong signal," she said. "Above us." Nina's eyes widened. "Another speaker?" Sasha nodded. "And it's live." The officer frowned. "Can you locate it?" Sasha didn't answer with confidence she didn't have. She said, "We can get close." They moved fast, escorted by police, upstairs, through a door that smelled of dust and old paint.
Harriet's heart hammered. They reached a maintenance corridor, narrow, utilitarian, lined with panels and wiring conduits. It felt less like a cultural center and more like the inside of a machine. Sacha pointed towards a ceiling panel. There, a technician pried it open. Inside was another device, larger, wired into power, its tiny indicator light blinking. Sacha didn't touch it immediately. She filmed it, documented wires, angles, anything that would prove deliberate placement. Then she unplugged it. Silence slammed down. Harriet's shoulders sagged. And then a new sound appeared, one that wasn't engineered. A small, human sob. Harriet turned sharply. The sob came further down the maintenance corridor, behind a half-open door. Police drew back slightly, cautious. One officer pushed the door open. Inside was a tiny service room, barely big enough for a chair and a cabinet. And there, sitting on the floor, was a woman with a bruised face and a torn sleeve, her hands shaking. Elodie Mercer, alive. Terrified. Breathing.
Her eyes lifted and landed on Harriet. And for a second, Harriet saw something in them. Recognition. Not of Harriet, but of the voice she'd heard. Elodie tried to speak. Only a whisper came. Harriet stepped forward slowly, carefully. "It's okay," she said softly. Elodie's lips trembled. I heard you," she whispered. You were calling." Harriet's throat tightened. "That wasn't me." Elodie shook her head, tears sliding. "It sounded like you. It sounded like you were right outside. And then—" Her eyes darted to the shadows. Sasha's voice was calm, but her jaw was tight. "They used her voice to lure you," she said to the officer, "to make you move, to make you look." Elodie's breath hitched. He said the building would tell the truth." Harriet's blood turned cold. "Elodie," Harriet whispered. "Who said that?" Elodie swallowed, eyes glossy. "A man," she said. He didn't have to be there, but I heard him. I heard him everywhere." Harriet's stomach twisted. Because the worst part wasn't that someone had heard Elodie. The worst part was that Elodie had been harmed by a lie that sounded like Harriet asking for help. Harriet felt tears rise, furious and helpless. Nina's hand found her shoulder, steadying. Police moved Elodie gently, wrapped her in a blanket. Sasha leaned close to Harriet and whispered, "We've disrupted their system. Now we force them into mistakes." Harriet nodded, throat tight.
But as they led Elodie out, Harriet heard one last whisper, faint, distant, as if the building itself was reluctant to let the performance end. Her own voice, soft as breath. "You can unplug speakers, Harriet." A pause. "But you can't unplug what people remember." Weeks later, Harriet still flinched when she heard her name in a crowded place. The case didn't resolve with a neat confession or a dramatic arrest in a rain-slick alley. It resolved the way real London problems did. Slowly, through paperwork and patterns and the stubborn accumulation of proof. Police found more devices over time, some hidden, some already removed. They traced purchase orders through shell companies. They pulled access logs from staff doors. They found forged IDs. The Barbican was forced to admit vulnerabilities it had never wanted to see. Elodie recovered enough to speak in full sentences. Her story was fragmented,
stitched together by fear and the deep, humiliating certainty that she'd been controlled by sound. She described hearing Harriet's voice calling her towards the stairs. She described believing she was helping someone. She described a moment where the building seemed full of people who weren't there. The mastermind wasn't caught by haunted corridors. He was caught by arrogance. Crispin Holt had left traces, the kind that obsessive people leave when they believe their art is too clever to be understood. A private forum post about architectural ventriloquism. A message to a colleague about turning witness memory into clay. A file on his laptop labeled Barbican, voice maps. He claimed it was research. He claimed it was theater. He claimed he never intended harm. Sasha dismantled those claims in a report that read like a scalpel.
Nina sat beside Harriet during interviews, eyes bright with righteous fury, refusing to let Harriet shrink. Harriet gave statements until her voice felt like something separate from her body again. And in the end, it wasn't just Crispin. There was an accomplice, someone within estates, someone who could open doors, who could place devices without suspicion, someone who had wanted a crime hidden behind the illusion of someone else's presence. The Barbican Echo wasn't a ghost story. It was a corruption story, a story about how buildings can be turned into instruments, how concrete can be made to lie. On a quiet afternoon, Harriet stood on the Barbican's lakeside terrace with Sacha and watched the water ripple beneath brutalist balconies. Sacha said, "You did well." Harriet laughed softly, tired. "They used my voice to hurt someone." Sacha's gaze was steady. "And you used your expertise to stop it happening again." Harriet stared at the water, at the reflections that broke and reformed. "It still feels like they stole something." "They did," Sacha said. "They stole certainty." Nina leaned against the railing, and they picked the wrong woman to mess with. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, her body tensed automatically. She pulled it out. Unknown number. A chill crawled up her spine. Sacha's eyes narrowed. "Don't answer."
Sacha played it through a forensic app, recording it immediately. There was only silence at first. Then, faintly, Harriet heard something that wasn't her voice. A breath, a real one, close to the microphone, human, nervous. And then a whisper, male, unfamiliar. "This is not over," the whisper said. Harriet's skin went cold. Sacha stopped the playback and looked at Harriet carefully. "It might not be," Sacha said, voice low. "But now we know the difference." Harriet swallowed. "The difference between what?" Sacha gestured around them, the open air, the water, the people laughing in the distance, the city refusing to stop. "The difference," she said, "between a voice in concrete and a voice in a throat." Harriet stared at the Barbican's corridors beyond the glass doors, at the shadows where sound had once pretended to be bodies. She took a slow breath. Then she did something small but powerful, something she hadn't managed the first time. She said her own name out loud, into the real air, letting it belong to her again. "Harriet Knox." The word didn't echo in a corridor. It simply existed. And for the first time in weeks, the building didn't answer back.